Good morning, Texas Realtors. Thanks so much for joining us for a discussion previewing the 87th Legislature, also known as the 2021 legislative session. I'm Jaime Lee, your Director of Advocacy Communications. Joining us today are three incredible leaders and experts in Texas real estate advocacy. I'll run through a couple housekeeping items for you. This is a Zoom meeting. It's being recorded. All registrants will receive a link to the recording shortly after it concludes. We've disabled the chat just because we have so many people in attendance. We are, however, the Q&A is wide open. So as we go through, if you have any questions at all about content we're covering or something we haven't mentioned, throw it in the Q&A, staff are monitoring it, and we'll do our best to answer them timely. And if we don't answer it during the discussion, we will certainly follow up with you. So I'm very proud to introduce our guest. We have 2021 Chairman Marvin Jolly joining us from Plano, Texas. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
Well, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah.
We also have 2021 Chairman of the Association's Public Policy Oversight Committee, Jef Conn of Lubbock. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And finally, Julia Parenteau, the Association's Director of Public Policy, joining us from Austin. Hey, Julia.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jamie.
Good morning. So we'll discuss on this webinar several general topics to preview the legislative session, and then get into some of the questions that registrants submitted in advance. Again, if you have any questions, throw them down in the Q&A and we'll monitor it. Also, election day is over, but we're going to ask you to vote. We have a few poll questions that'll pop up throughout today's session, like one coming now. We like to say that advocacy happens everywhere, as obvious from the cities I just listed out. So tell us, where are you attending this webinar right now? Are you at home? Are you at your office? Are you on the road safely, of course? Are you in an undisclosed location or somewhere else? We'll take a few seconds to let the results come in. And those numbers are going up. No surprise, the majority of y'all are at home. Lots of you still in the office working though. Cool, appreciate it. Advocacy everywhere, as we say. Okay, no, we've got a lot of ground to cover. Let's just dive in, get right into the meat of it, guys. Legislature 101, Julia, Director of Public Policy. A few members who registered admitted they aren't familiar with the inner workings of the Texas Legislature. And in their defense, there's a lot to know. So can you give us some Policy 101 about the legislature? When do they meet, who they are, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. And if I start getting too far in the weeds, just give me the reel it back sign. So the Texas Legislature is made up of 181 members. There are 31 in the Senate and 150 in the House. They are, of course, representing all of us all around the state of Texas. A fun fact, since we're talking about the Senate, our Senate districts here in Texas are actually bigger. Our senators represent more Texans than our Congress people do. So those are very, very large districts. We, of course, have our executive branch led by Governor Abbott. The Senate is overseen by our Lieutenant Governor, who is Dan Patrick. And in the House, they are run by a Speaker of the House. We have an outgoing Speaker and a new incoming Speaker due to some folks who decided not to run for re-election. So right now we have our presumptive Speaker of the House in 2021 will be Dade Phelan from Beaumont. Our legislature is, actually relatively evenly divided politically. The Republicans do have control of all three chambers, but it's not by a massive majority. In the House, it is 83 Republicans to 67 Democrats. And in the Senate, it is 18 Republicans to 13 Democrats. So the Texas Legislature meets every other year, which is actually unusual. Most legislatures meet every year. A lot of states around the country are part-time legislatures like ours are, where they'll meet for a handful of months and then go home for the rest of the year. But there are not very many that only do it every other year. So the Texas state constitution requires that they meet every other year for up to 140 days, beginning on the second Tuesday of January. So in 2021, that is January 12th. And the up to 140 days means that they would have to conclude by Memorial Day. So it's always that second Tuesday of January to Memorial Day. It is not common that they lean into the up to language in the Constitution. Usually they go ahead and use their full 140 days, but there have been times throughout history where they have adjourned early. So they are in charge of just, a wealth, unlimited amount of state statutes. They oversee everything that we do in our daily lives, with some exceptions that I think we might talk about a little bit later today. But for the real estate industry, everything related to finance and the transaction, and a lot of how our communities are built and developed. That's where some of the interplay with our local entities come in. So there is a lot that they have going on, and a lot that we need to pay attention to. How's that for a start?
Well, Julie, you mentioned that they convene in January, but are they busy right now?
Yes, ma'am. The legislature is part-time, as we said, but that does not mean that they aren't working on their legislative business in the interim. But the interim is the word that you'll hear tossed around for the time when they're not actually convened in formal legislative session. So they, in ordinary years, this not really being one of those. In ordinary years, the legislature has standing committees that do meet in the interim, even when they're not in session. And often what they'll do is hold meetings all around the state. So it's easier for their constituents to come and participate and tell the legislature what their feelings and opinions are on all of the issues under their purview. This year, of course, they couldn't do that, but at least the around the state meetings in person. But a number of the committees did get together and talk about the subjects that are under their jurisdiction for their committees. They did take a lot of written testimony from members of the public. And so they've been working on things. They've been working and planning, and we always try to stay in touch with our legislators, because you can't just start cold on January. If you haven't been part of the process in the interim, you're going to miss a whole bunch of things. So
yeah, that leads me to my next question for you, Chairman Jolly, is what do you say when you get this question from especially members who wonder, why are realtors even engaged in politics and public policy?
Right. Why are realtors involved in politics? And a lot of times, Jamie, when people think about politics, they think about the presidential election. And that is really not even what we're talking about today. We're talking about Texas politics. And it's so great that everybody joined us today to find out what Texas Realtors is doing in the area of the Texas Legislature and where we're headed next year. And our organization has been involved in the political scene in Texas since we started in 1920. There's a saying that a couple things we like to say at Texas Realtors. And number one, it is, if real estate is your career, then politics is your business. Again, if real estate's your career, politics is your business. Whether you know that or not, whether you believe that or not, it is. Also, the other funny thing that we say is, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So we like to make sure that we are always at the table when important decisions are made across the state of Texas. You think about the real estate business, and so much of it, almost everything that we do is regulated. We've got contracts that are state regulated contracts, licensing, appraisals, so many conversations around property tax, which I'm sure we'll get more into today. All those things are influenced by the Texas Legislature. So one of the most important jobs that Texas Realtors does for 135,000 realtors across the state of Texas, and for countless homeowners and property owners, is our advocacy work with the Texas Legislature. And we like to believe, Jamie, that we're changing the world one bill at a time, or one legislative relationship at a time, as Julie mentioned. So it's really important, and it affects everyone's lives, everyone's businesses. And it's really an exciting part of what Texas Realtors does.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. And you mentioned bills. Julia, we got a question in the Q&A. Have bills started to be filed?
Yes, they have. The legislature is actually able to start filing bills the week after the general election is over. So they have been filing bills since the second week of November. And, actually this year, everyone was kind of waiting on pins and needles to see how that played out, with the pandemic happening. And actually the first day of bill filing was record setting. More bills got filed that day than had ever been filed before. So legislators are still having ideas and still trying to make laws happen.
Well, say more about how they're doing that response at the Capitol to the pandemic. I mean, is it open? Is it closed? What is the actual building even like right now?
So physically is the question to start. So the Capitol building has been closed down to the public since things really started shutting down earlier this spring. The legislature, of course, was not in session, and most of their staff were not in the office all day, every day. Although some staff members are. That's their workspace. That's where they go every day. So for quite a while, it was shut down entirely. After about June, they also shut the grounds down. So the fences, if you've been to the Capitol or if you have not, the grounds have a big iron fence all the way around, but at each cardinal corner, there is gates that you can typically walk through. If you're a legislator and have the right passes, 3 of them you can drive through. But those were all locked down. And so, and actually for a while, there was even very charming police tape, the yellow emergency tape all the way around the fence perimeter. I think there's a metaphor in there somewhere. That is gone. And actually, as of yesterday, now we understand that the Capitol grounds have been open. And so for the first time since this summer. So if you're in Austin, go take a walk on the hill and have a lovely little stroll through the trees. We haven't been able to do that for a long time. The building right now is still closed down to the public. So we are still waiting to hear how that is going to go come January. The decision makers on that really are the 3 leadership, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House, as well as consultation with the facilities and preservation boards who oversee kind of the operations of the Capitol. And they are working on it, but we don't have firm answers yet. I think that the general desire that we hear from folks is that they do hope that they are able to have the Capitol open in some capacity to the public. It is very likely that capacity, building occupancy capacity will be limited. Right now, this is a fun fact for writing down for future trivia questions. The Texas Capitol buildings, the building capacity is about 6,000 people. We don't expect they are going to let 6,000 people pile in there all day, every day, which is typically what is happening during a legislative session. Is it's full. I don't see anybody doing the bouncer ticker at the front door. They must have a system for knowing how many people are in there, but it gets real crowded sometimes. So they are going to likely limit how many people are able to be in there at a given time, minus of course the legislators and their staff, and we have members of the press as well, and then however many spaces are left over for members of the public. So hopefully we'll know soon, but it might not be till early January.
Yeah, and no matter what the Capitol building actually looks like, whether doors are open or closed or they're limited, there's bouncers, realtors will be extremely engaged in the legislative process. Jef, my next question is for you, sir. Texas Realtors wrote a book recently. I've been calling it Our Legislative Priorities for the Session. And in your role as Public Policy Oversight Committee Chairman, I'd like to ask you, tell us a little bit about how we got to this book, this legislative priorities. I want to be sure that we remind our members this is a member-driven process, and you'd be great to comment on that, sir.
Absolutely. That book did not happen overnight. We work in the off years, the non-legislative years. Those are the years that Olympics happen. And we work to make sure that all the things that are important to real estate get presented. So if there's any friction points in our real estate deals that could be handled through legislation, if our city councils are passing things that aren't realtor friendly or aren't private property friendly, we want to work to alleviate those if possible. Oftentimes what happens in Amarillo also happens in Houston, so we can work statewide to fix these issues. But it comes from the members, and we work with our legislative staff, and we have the subcommittees of the public policy, and they put in hundreds of hours of work. Usually we get together in Austin and have these meetings, but it's 2020. We did it over Zoom like we're doing here. And we talked about every single item in detail. Where possible, we brought in experts to let us know the good, the bad, the ugly of everything we had. So when we present our priorities to the legislators, they know exactly what we need, exactly what we want, and they're very researched. After we dial that list down, we put it out for member comments. So all 135,000 of us can comment on them, and thousands of comments came in on those. So for those who participated, thank you. That helps fine tune our legislative priorities. After that, it goes to the executive board who review it multiple times, and the LMT approved. And you guys can look a copy of it if you go to texasrealestate.com/issues. That's texasrealestate.com/issues. You can download the PDF and read everything that's in there, from appraisal reform to HOA reform. There's something in there for you and your business.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'll repeat that again. texasrealestate.com/issues. That's where the PDF lives. Some of these issues are familiar, like you said, appraisals, property taxes, but a few are new: increased access to hospitals, broadband internet. Can you talk to us about how that happened, how you were sure to include those timely issues?
We always have to be flexible. And so this year, when all of us are living our lives on Zoom, it appears that we need access to broadband. And we think about schools who are shut down, and kids in smaller communities, rural communities, and in the middle of Houston, people who don't have access to broadband. It's a vital public need that was not really accentuated as much as it was in 2020. So it's a long overdue issue, but really when things happen in the world, we respond, and it's become forefront for things like access to hospitals and broadband internet to be addressed.
Yep, absolutely timely. So Chairman Jolly, we have these policy priorities, and we have Julia and the lobby team, and then who on the member side does the actual daily work of keeping that policy team on track as bills move through the process?
That's a great question, Jamie. And while we have talented staff members who are highly experienced, like Julia and the lobby team, to go and meet with legislators and stay up to speed on some things, they report back to the legislative management team. The legislative management team is the member organization that makes all the decisions that are best for Texas Realtors. And those decisions are made through that committee process. They feed up through the committee process that Jef talked about. So the legislative management team is a group of members who are made up of the chairs and vice chairs of our 4 government affairs committees. So every decision that we make and all the action that we take in this organization is done by members, for members, with the help and support of some talented staff members.
Cool. Perfect. And going to be all hours of the day, probably nights and weekends.
Yeah. In the legislative session, legislative management team is even involved in the bill review process. So we'll dig into the database that's called Telecon, and we'll be reviewing thousands of bills along with staff members. And there may be some late night phone calls or some early morning Zoom calls if there is a committee, if there's a bill going to committee or a bill going to the floor, and we need to know, and we need to all be on the same page from a member perspective on where we want to be there.
Yep, great reminder that it is a member-driven process at every step along the way.
That's right.
And I think now is a great time to get into some specific issues. And you know what? Let's have another poll question. Poll question number 2. What is your top issue for the 2021 legislative session? Got a few options: property taxes, state budget, public education. Take a few seconds and vote, and we'll see what number 1 is. And then Julia, get ready to break out your crystal ball. I mean, we've got hundreds of people chimed in. I'm so excited at the turnout for this. I'm not good at calling horse races, but that is pretty strong showing for property taxes. Out ahead of, yeah, 36%. Thank you for voting. Interesting. So, Julia, we have gotten a lot of questions from attendees about specific issues the legislature may take up. So I'm going to pepper you and Marvin and Jef with some questions about specific issues. So lots of realtors want to know what kind of legislation might be passed related to essential services, and if there'll be a plan in place in case something like 2020 pandemic happens again.
So start there. Okay.
Go.
Well, let me say first that we are very thankful that real estate and related services were deemed to be essential by the federal government, as well as by our governor and his team, which were the folks who were making the decisions here in Texas in this particular pandemic. That may change going forward, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But for whomever is making the decision, we are grateful that real estate was given a top slot in that consideration for its impact on, not just the economy of the state, but directly on people's lives. Other states were not so lucky, if I may go off on a tangent. There were a handful of other states that had holdouts in terms of what they were going to allow real estate to do. And as you can imagine, as real estate practitioners, that caused a lot of problems, not just for realtor members, but for people who were stuck, literally between homes, who, had nowhere to go because they had maybe sold their previous home and everything was shut down, so they couldn't move to another one. So making sure that real estate continues to function regardless of what is happening. We'll always do our best to innovate and be safe, of course, but in one way or another, making sure that y'all can still function and do your job is critical. So what might pass in terms of legislation related to essential services? I think that brings up a question really on that emergency power and authority. There has been lots of debate about whether that should be the governor, whether that should be the legislature called in a special session, or some other new emergency board. You'll see probably a lot of bills related to that. Right now, that is not something that Texas Realtors has a strong position on. As I said, our concern is the end goal, regardless really of who is making the decision. We just want to make sure that y'all can keep doing your jobs and people can continue to access housing. But there are a lot of people with a lot of vested interest in the delegation of emergency powers. So that will be something that is hotly debated, I'm sure. Secondly, I think that the legislature will, of course, be looking at healthcare. The access to care that Jaime mentioned and Jef mentioned earlier with our rural hospitals, but also just how folks are able to access insurance and healthcare facilities, and what structures we need to put in place that we don't currently have to make sure people have access to the care that we need. We were hearing before the pandemic even that healthcare was a top priority among constituents, that candidates, when they were out in the very, very early days of campaigning in January and February, that they were hearing a lot of healthcare commentary from folks at the doors when they were door knocking. So we kind of anticipated it was going to be a healthcare session even before all of this, and now definitely it will be. I think that you are going to see conversations about money. The budget projections for the state of Texas have changed a lot from where we sit today in December, from where we thought we were going to be back in January. And we still don't have all of the final answers on that. Our comptroller will put out a budget review in January that will give a much clearer picture on how 2020 ended. And I think right now a lot of people are sitting and thinking that maybe it's not going to be quite as dire as we were worried it was going to be, especially in May and June. But they are anticipating a deficit one way or another. It's just a matter of how bad a deficit it is. And so when you talk about anything passing the legislature, really at all, you have to consider it in terms of, is there money to do what you want to do? So there's a lot of things that are they're going to have to make some really hard decisions. So those are the top ones that we are anticipating hearing about. What else would we like to talk about, Jamie?
Jamie, if I could interject here,
please.
And expound on what Julia mentioned, in addition to the actual legislation that may pass in regard to essential services, we want to continue our strong relationships with our elected officials. We want to continue that strong relationship that we have with Governor Abbott, who proactively reached out to Texas Realtors to get our input and insight on how to reopen the economy. And so that relationship is very strong. We also want to continue to get to see positive, proactive legislators elected in the future. And so that's part of the work that TREPAC does. All those things play into the relationship. So in terms of essential services, getting some good legislation passed would be fantastic. In addition to that, and in the event that that doesn't happen, the relationships that we have with wonderful legislators is incredibly crucial, and that'll always be a big job that we as Texas Realtors will always want to do.
I think that's a great point. And I know we got some questions about that, about how realtors decide which candidates to support. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that we're not red, we're not blue, we're purple, we're the Realtor Party. We work with the candidates who support private property rights in the real estate industry. So I'm sure you said it much better, sir, though. Julia, I was going to ask you about the budget, but I think you covered it. And
well, and Jamie, we do have a question in the chat that's specific on sales tax exemptions for building materials. So, and we have one on the rainy day fund. So let's, if you don't mind, I'll say a couple of words more specifically on some of those things, because as we said, they are anticipating a deficit, and when that happens, you have two choices. You can either bring in more money, or you can cut your spending. We all have our own personal budgets to oversee, and it's frankly, it's maybe more complicated at the state legislature, but the fundamentals are the same. You have inflow and outflow. So when we have a deficit, you'll see people looking for both solutions. Cuts here, looking for new sources of revenue over here. And so there was a question about sales tax exemptions. We actually in Texas exempt a lot of things from sales taxes, a lot of things. We exempt more things than we tax. So there are people who are definitely going to be looking to see where we can close some of those gaps by taxing stuff that has previously been untaxed. That could include personal property, personal business property, like building materials in the case of builders. It could also look like sales tax on services. We read a bill yesterday that was an extreme expansion of the sales tax base to include taxes on services, specifically including real estate services. Now, that is something that Chairman Conn has in the Public Policy Priorities booklet as a longstanding position of Texas Realtors, that we oppose sales tax on services, specifically real estate services. The costs that it would add to the average transaction are very, very high, and it would be really damaging to the real estate market. We will continue to uphold that policy position and make sure everyone at the Texas Legislature understands the impacts of what that would be. As far as the likelihood of any of those other sales tax exemptions being repealed, it really just depends on what the budget projections are when they come together in January and how much money they need to make up. I think that the legislature, at least in recent history, has done their best not to raise taxes. And I understand that Governor Abbott has been speaking in some groups saying there will not be any new taxes. So I don't know if that is a hint that he would veto something like that were to pass the legislature all the way through. Might be. That's speculation. I can't speak for him, but it'll be a challenge one way or another.
But that's a really good point, that just because a bill is filed, it has a long journey to get to actually being signed into law. My next question that we got from a few registrants was related to redistricting. And, thousands of us completed the census earlier this year. How do those two things relate? And why is it important to Texas? And certainly will be a priority to the legislature. I'll leave this to anyone, but Julie, I think you unmuted first.
Yeah, well, so the legislature is required to do redistricting following the federal census, so every 10 years. And the point is to reevaluate our political districts to make sure that our populations within those districts are relatively equally distributed, that you don't have one Senate or House district that has, 1 million people in it and one that has 30,000 in it. They're supposed to have about the same number, which is why, some districts in Texas are physically massive and others are itty bitty tiny because the space between Austin and El Paso has a lot fewer people than some of the neighborhoods of Harris County. So the district sizes will change, but the goal is to have equal distribution of people and relatively contiguous like cultural identity. So the census, of course, is where they get the data for that. Now, this year with the pandemic, of course, we are anticipating that the federal government will not have the census data at the time frame that they ordinarily would have. And so it's a little bit in flux right now about whether the legislature is going to be able to tackle that or not. It is my understanding, I am not a state constitutional scholar on this particular matter, that the Constitution says that the redistricting work is supposed to be done in the first regular session following the census. So this starting in January would be that, except that we don't have the numbers. And so there's some debate about whether if they get the numbers too late, if they are going to be able to take up redistricting in a special session, or if they are going to have to wait, in which case some other things kick in. There's a legislative redistricting board made up of the legislative leadership and some other folks who might be tasked with looking at some of those lines in the interim. For the federal seats, it might go to the court to decide. Or if it's just determined that they can do it in a special session, that's probably what we'll be doing this summer. So we'll see. But I think that either Jef or Marvin might be able to talk a little bit about, why redistricting matters to Texas Realtors and to our advocacy efforts and how we reach out to people out in the district.
Sure. Julia, I think you touched on something that I want to highlight even more so, and that is the fact that the state legislature is responsible for redistricting. They're redistricting not only their own state representative districts, not only their own state Senate districts, but the state legislature is also redistricting the federal congressional districts. So that's really interesting when you think about the state legislature having control and influence at the federal level and how those seats are elected and who may occupy those seats. So it's really interesting to see that the state legislature has really far reach and a lot of influence even at the federal level in regard to redistricting. Jef, what do you think about that?
I agree with you. And the interesting thing is you've got to follow the money. So all of the work and the power that the legislature has here in Texas that rolls up to the national level, it comes down to dollars and cents. That will change the allocation we get for education and healthcare and all types of services. So it's very important that when Texas does this, they get it right and it's equitable for all Texans.
Absolutely great points, guys. And that lends itself very well to the next issue of you mentioned the local impact that redistricting and census and federal funds have. Another local impact, trying to segue to get there, property taxes. We just seconds ago conducted an informal survey of our members to ask for their top priority, and the majority said property taxes. But 2019, there were several bills related to property taxes that the association supported that passed. So why are we still talking about this? In fact, Chairman Jolly, I believe you were even on the hot seat testifying at House Ways and Means on several of these bills. So why are we still at it?
That's right. Property taxes are an incredibly important part of the work that we do. And as you mentioned in the survey, it's a hot topic today. So we'll never be finished perfecting the property tax system that affects property owners in Texas. We've spent a lot of time working on how properties are assessed and appraised, and how all that process is done. We're now recently we've focused on the rate setting process. Most people don't know, and by the way, we have a campaign at Texas Realtors that's called "You Deserve to Know." You deserve to know. You deserve to know how your property tax bill comes into being. You deserve to know how all that's calculated, who is involved in those decisions, and how you as a property owner and how you as a realtor can advise and consult people in your sphere of influence and your past clients. So it's not only in the assessed value of the property. I mean, I think we all, when we get that tax bill, we all like to go up to the county and we like to fight that, protest that tax bill and win and save $42 a year on those taxes. So we like to do that. That's a small part of the big picture. The other component that we have to focus on and that we need to make sure that all property owners in Texas understand is that the rate setting process is the other part of that. And rates are set at the municipal level. They are set at the county level. They are set at the community college level. If there's a hospital district, that hospital district is setting those rates. So each one of those taxing entities is setting their tax, school districts, they're all setting their tax rates. So then the question is, what does that mean? And what can we do as citizens and property owners and as realtors? What do we do with that information? Most people don't know, but we deserve to know that in each fall, those taxing entities have budget meetings and they decide what their budget's going to be and they decide how they're going to set those rates. They are also required to hold a hearing so that citizens, property owners can come and voice their opinion on how their own tax dollars are being allocated and used in that taxing entity, whether that's the city, the county, the school district, et cetera. It also has some indirect relationship to the people that we elect to serve in those roles. So again, your local realtor association hopefully is involved in getting great city council people, great school board members, all those kinds of roles. So all of that, all of those components factor in to how property taxes are calculated in Texas. And Jamie, I really think we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more opportunity and responsibility for Texas realtors to continue to refine the system in Texas.
Yeah, and this is certainly a long-term campaign. It's
That's
an
right.
education effort, and to let realtors know about the changes that came out of that SB2, the new suite of legislation, but also the very basics about the property tax system, the 101. So that's going to be a great campaign for our members. Jef, in your role overseeing the creation of the priorities, one of which is property taxes, would you agree? Would you care to comment?
Absolutely. I think it's important that people, especially our members, get involved at the local level now, because what we do today, showing up to city council meetings and showing up to those hearings, will determine how much we and our clients pay in the future. So yes, we think about it like Marvin said when we get those statements, but we need to start thinking about it proactively as opposed to reacting to it. Another interesting thing about these priorities is we do our best to do a ton of research and make sure the best laws are passed to protect private property rights and to protect realtors. Now, when laws are passed, we have great influence at the Texas Capitol, but that doesn't mean every single thing we want gets passed. So oftentimes we have to look at these legislative sessions as a way to do minor corrections on previous year's successes. Sometimes when laws roll out, there are the small minutia of unintended consequences that you don't realize until you put them into practice. So this legislative session, we've got a lot to do, including cleaning up some things that happened in years past. There might be some weak points, or maybe a law was passed and it wasn't perfect, but we know we can go back and change it later. A great example of that would be Senate Bill 2, which made huge strides, but there's a lot of things that need to change on that. So this year, if we can get through all the pandemic related laws, as well as education funding and healthcare funding, we're going to have to work on cleaning things up. But it all comes down to time. As Julia said, we have up to 140 days before the extra sessions start. And we'll do our best to get as many cleanup rules as done as possible, as well as working on our new legislative priorities, which again, you can see at texasrealestate.com/issues.
Well, Julia, while you're there in the Capitol, however that looks for you, do you expect property taxes to actually be a top priority for lawmakers? What are you hearing?
Well, as y'all mentioned, there was that large package of legislation known as SB2, Senate Bill 2, that passed in 2019. It was it covered a lot of bases, and so I think that you'll see the legislature this year, as Jef mentioned, look at places where they might need to tweak that system. And make small improvements. However, we should note that Senate Bill 2 and all of the elements it contained are actually still in the rollout phase. The initial rollout here in 2020 only impacted our largest counties, and our smaller counties all had to 2021 to be able to roll a lot of those elements out. So the legislature is likely to say, listen, we haven't even seen how this works in all of our places in Texas yet. So before we do anything major, we're going to give it a little bit more time. But they will likely be able to tweak a few things. Two things I want to say that are going to sound somewhat disjointed, but one is a question that popped up in the chat, and I think it's relevant here, and that was, is it possible to have a uniform system of taxation set by the state rather than multiple entities at the local level? And the short answer is, when it comes to the property tax, no, not easily. In Texas, a state level property tax is actually banned by our Constitution. So we have set up a structure that says, no, the state of Texas cannot collect a property tax. And so it's only given that authority to our local taxing entities. That is possible to be changed. We do change our Constitution, but how that works is a bill and another bill. There's two bills. It's one is a regular bill, either a Senate bill or a House bill, and then what we call a House or a Senate joint resolution. They have to kind of say the same thing, get at the same thing. And the joint resolution is, this is the language that's going to go into the Constitution that supports whatever this bill is over here. Those have to be passed by the Senate, the House, and approved by the governor. And how it has to pass through the legislature is with a supermajority support. And then those are what become our statewide proposition campaigns. You might remember there's propositions usually every odd year on your ballot. The last one that the realtors engaged in really heavily was in 2017, which was a fix to home equity. That was our Prop 2 in 2017. 2015 was the big Prop 1 that banned our transfer taxes. So the joint resolution has to go to a vote of all of the people of Texas to say yes. So imagine the process of the legislature by supermajority, the governor not vetoing, and the state of Texas saying, yes, we want a state level property tax. That's how we'd have to get there. So probably not. It's technically possible, likely not. And the other thing that relates to state legislation, I want to call back to the way Marvin was talking about, Marvin and Jef both were talking about the engagement at the local level and how critical that is. And if you walk away from this session with nothing else, this is not exactly a legislative preview tidbit of information, but remember the difference between local tax rates and local tax revenue. The tax rate is what gets you the revenue you need as a city or a county or a school district. But the revenue, the budget, is what determines whether you out there in the world are going to pay more or less in your taxes. So if your city or your county or your school district is taking in more property tax revenue each year, your taxes are probably going to go up. It doesn't matter what the rate is. The rate can go down and the property tax revenue can still go up. So you got to pay attention to that last number. Okay. And so all of that to say that the state legislature will probably do some tweaks on property taxes, but ultimately right now, what your tax liability is year to year is dependent on the revenue that your taxing entities want to take in to fund the stuff that they're paying for at the local level. So that's where you really need to pay attention.
Yeah, excellent. And I will remind, I think it's in the chat, but knowyourtaxes.org is a great resource to get even some fun infographics that help explain the process that Julie was just laying out. In the interest of time, I really want to get into realtor engagement. I mean, there's so many issues at the state and local level, but what action items can we actually give to members? So, we mentioned earlier that no matter what happens at the Capitol, realtors will be engaged. And one of the highlights of our association's advocacy efforts is the incredible Realtor Day at the Texas Capitol event. In 2019, about 3,000 realtors came to Austin, met with their lawmakers in hallways, in meeting rooms, in offices, wherever they could, to discuss priority bills during the session. That's not likely to happen this year in the same way. So let's reflect on the good times. And I'd love to ask Marvin and Jef, Chairman Jolly, you of course have been extremely engaged in Realtor Day. Talk to us in your own words as a member and a leader. What is it? Why is it critical for the association's advocacy efforts?
Jamie, it's incredibly critical, and it's so interesting when you experience it as a Realtor member for the first time. I remember going to my very first Realtor Day. It was 20 years ago. And I met with my state representative, who I had seen back at home in the district at public events and, the grocery store, et cetera. And back at home, we had some friendly conversation, but we didn't talk about bill number X. There wasn't a lot of substance. When we went to Realtor Day and our team sat down with our state representative, we had the Texas Realtors legislative agenda in front of us. We had been trained by our leadership and by our staff on how to handle those conversations. And it was amazing to see the light bulb moment with that legislator when he saw that his members, his constituents, the people that are voting for him back at home had been educated and really cared about issues. And it's just so powerful when constituents from home have those conversations with legislators. Julia and our lobby team are fantastically talented, have wonderful expertise and experience. And it's still different when somebody from home who goes to the voting booth comes to talk to you about issues. That's our biggest leverage at Texas Realtors, is our grassroots and our people and the relationships that we were able to build.
Love that. Couldn't have said it any better. And I think for an especially timely perspective, Jef, over the past few months, it seems like in your role as chairman, you've interviewed almost every lawmaker, it feels like, in Texas at our virtual events, called the Policy Forum, Conference, Orientation. So now that we're able to do these virtually, why is even that setting important for realtors?
We would all like to be in person for all of these meetings. We miss hugging each other's necks and talking to each other. And Zoom does not replace those meetings. And one day we'll return to those. But in the interim, while we're in the middle of a global pandemic, Zoom has been so key to bringing in more members. There's only so many people that the Hyatt will hold in Austin when we have our meetings there, or at the other cities around the state. But with Zoom, we can open it up to an almost limitless number. So the great thing is we get to have increased participation because people can stop for an hour and listen to a presentation directly from their elected officials and then go back to work and show a house or a commercial property. They don't have to travel and spend 2 or 3 days. What it's meant is more access directly to our elected officials. More people can easily log on from home or work or wherever they are. And for those of you driving, please be safe and keep your eyes on the road. It allows us to bring the legislative process and priorities to our members wherever they are. And I think that's a great thing. And hopefully we'll see portions of this continue in the future.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great point. And then that was a great time to bring up our third and final poll question. Get your voting fingers ready. Would you attend a virtual meeting with your lawmaker in 2021? Yes, no, I don't know. I'm sure we can assume the answer, but we'll see. Give you a few seconds to vote. Because now's the time to start planning. I mean, the year's not over, but we got to get ready for 21. Boom, 95%. I think maybe those 3 will have a conflict that day. There'll be a meeting, so we'll record the meeting for you 3. Most of you, of course, said yes. That event and those events similar, like we did over the summer with our Hill visits, meeting with congressional members, and having these panel discussions that Jef was able to moderate, are just incredible examples of realtor engagement. So, Chairman Jolly, other than planning those virtual meetings, how can our members remain plugged in during the legislative session?
Sure, Jamie, there are really 3 things that our members can do to be part of this process as we go into the legislative session. Number 1, if you haven't subscribed to the Legislative Liaison newsletter, make sure and subscribe. You want to be part of that. That's going to give you updates on what's happening. So that's the Legislative Liaison. You can subscribe to that newsletter. The second thing is sign up for Realtor Party Mobile Alerts. Realtor Party Mobile Alerts. So that goes straight to your phone. It also involves federal issues. So make sure that you are up to speed on Legislative Liaison newsletter and the Realtor Party Mobile Alerts. My favorite, and I think the most impactful thing that we can do is, I would love it if everybody watching today joins their legislative contact team. Legislative contact team. What is that? Legislative contact team is the group of people who sits down face to face or over Zoom with that state representative, with that state senator, to talk about those issues on our legislative agenda. So we would love to have you in that conversation as a constituent from home with your legislator. So please be sure to join your legislative contact team.
And we can certainly, I think our coworkers putting some links in the chat so people can get signed up for the newsletter, get signed up for Realtor Party Mobile Alerts. And as far as joining a legislative contact team, the best way is to go through your field rep. So there's 6 regions in the state. Each, ooh, look at that, popped right up. Yeah, contact your local field rep. They'll get you signed up. As you alluded to, the local relationship is so critical with these, especially calls for action. I mean, there's just a list of reasons why it's so important. Julia, while you're here, anything you'd like to add about how our members can remain engaged no matter what the world looks like?
Well, all of the things that Marvin mentioned certainly are critical. And I was, as you said, the number of realtors who attended our last Realtor Day, almost 3,000 of y'all. Remember, I said at the beginning, the capacity of the building is about 6,000. So 50%, assuming that we were complying with all occupancy limits at that point, 50% of the beings in the legislature, in the Capitol building that day, are realtors. It's an incredible show of force. And in fact, I'll tell you that I hear from other lobbyists, like they want to know up front when Realtor Day is going to be so that they can stay home because they don't want to get in your way. They just want to clear out the halls for you. So it's an incredible show of how engaged you all are as realtors in your government. And how much you understand the way that the state and even your municipalities and your counties really impact your business and that of your clients. So demonstrating that you are paying attention when we have Zooms coming up in session with our legislators, when you have the option to talk with your local associations and with your field reps about what's important to you, about what you're seeing out in the world, please do so. Please keep in contact with us, your staff at the state association. You can always call us and tell us that, hey, there's this thing I think you should be paying attention to. Is there a way that the state legislature can get involved in this thing that's happening, because there's problems. So just stay in contact, stay aware, read the legislative liaison, and keep demonstrating that realtors, honestly, I mean, I'm in the legislative world every day. We have the most engaged, most informed, most passionate membership of any other organization out there, and the legislators know it, and that's why they pay attention to you.
That is perfect. I think in the interest of time, let's catch up on some of the Q&A before we do some closing remarks. There was a question, and this, please, for anyone who'd like, what should realtors be most concerned with in 2021, and what can we do to help? I think actually we outlined some great examples of that, but if anyone would like to add, please.
And I will, I'll jump in and say, I think I would speak for both Marvin and Jef in this, that you tell us. That's what, what we've been saying is you tell us what the priorities are and what we need to be focusing on. That's the whole point of the process that Jef outlaid with our public policy committees. And it goes into actually a couple of other questions that we got. Jamie, if you don't mind me jumping ahead, we had a couple of questions in the chat related to homeowners associations, which was an issue that our policy committees talked about at length this interim. And we hear our members loud and clear on that there are some problems out there engaging in transactions, or maybe even living in some homeowners associations. And that definitely is on the legislative radar. It's one of our, it's in the priorities booklet. You'll see it there. And we are starting to hear a lot of legislators that are recognizing more the struggle that those entities can be. So we are optimistic that we'll start chipping away a little bit at some of the challenges that you have there. And that just goes to the member-driven process. Again, we got lots and lots of comments this year from y'all about what you're dealing with in that world.
Let's see, we've got just a couple more minutes. I think we're going to do a hard stop at 11, but we can say a lot in 5 minutes, right? There was a question about redistricting and the importance of what is the impact on Texas if we can gain 2 or 3 new seats in Congress.
Yeah, well, that is exactly what Jef was talking about with the resources that come from the federal government. The resource allocation is based on population, which is why it's so critical that people respond to the census and are properly counted. Our federal highway funds, all sorts of other education, all of those funds are based on those population counts. And when it comes to the number of congressional seats that we have, if that does play out and demonstrates the way that Texas's population has grown over the last 10 years, and we wind up with, instead of 36 Congress people, 39 or 38 plus our 2 senators, of course, that just gives Texas a little bit more power in Congress overall, because there's more representation from Texas there when they go to DC.
You know, the other indirect connection with more congressional seats is congressional seats also equal electoral votes in the presidential election. So as Texas grows in population, if we get an accurate count on that, and if we have more congressional seats, we'll also gain some electoral votes for the next presidential election.
Cool. Let's see, we had some requests to mention the links again. So if you want to sign up for the Legislative Liaison newsletter, go to texasrealestate.com/liaison. It takes you to our subscriptions management page. So be sure the box is checked and click save, and you'll be signed up. And if you're interested in getting on one of the legislative contact teams, best contact is to go through your field rep, and you can email them at fieldreps@texasrealtors.com or go to texasrealestate.com/fieldreps. We love a vanity URL. We have a lot of vanity URLs, and we'll throw those in the chat again so that you can bump up just a reminder. Let me check on the Q&A and see if we got any more great questions.
Jamie, we got one question, a policy question on condo complexes and FHA approval. That's actually a federal question, not a state question. They have made some rule changes at HUD and FHA over the past couple of years to open that up. But if you're still seeing some problems with it, definitely reach out and let's talk a little bit more. That unfortunately is something that the Texas Legislature has less power over. So here in Austin, we can't quite fix that problem, but we can work with our DC partners on it.
And I believe there was a question I saw about our position supporting access to healthcare and hospitals. That's certainly in the priorities book, which is also at texasrealestate.com/issues. Julia or Jef, is that something you wanted to touch on? I know we started talking about access to healthcare as one of our priorities. Anything else you wanted to add?
That's definitely something we've talked about. We've heard from experts on that. So it will be presented this year as part of our legislative priorities. It will be up to the state legislatures to decide what moves forward. We're going to advocate and lobby for that. And we've got a successful track record that we're building on with years and years of relationships with our elected officials. So we're working on it. And if some or not all of it gets passed, remember in 2023, we can come back with a cleanup round and fix it if need be.
And I'll say specifically how you can help is by participating in those conversations with your elected officials that we mentioned and just reminding them how important that is to our smaller communities out throughout Texas.
I think we've got seconds left, so way to reach the time, team. This is great. Let's see, Jef, do you have one piece of advice you'd like to give realtors who are new to advocacy?
We've all been there. You're thinking, I know what some of these words mean. I'm really, really confused. Can someone explain this to me? That was me when I first started. Here's what you should do. Start with your local association. that you should have a governmental affairs or a tree pack type committee. Go there. And if you don't know who that is, just reach out to your local association, ask them to be involved. In my experience, most associations have one or two people that are very heavily involved at the state and national level. Reach out to those people because they are a fountain of information to get you plugged in. Now, I warn you, when you do this, you will be plugged in because we love volunteering. So just know by asking, you will be put on something in the future. But that's a great thing, and it's a great way to learn. When you go in with people who have experience, who have done this before, it takes the pressure off you. And when it comes time to talk to our elected officials in the coming months, the Texas Realtors will provide you with those talking points. And remember, texasrealestate.com/issues, you can get a preview of what that looks like.
Perfect. This concludes our content, but Mr. Chairman Jolly, we offer you the last word as we close out this preview of the legislative session, sir.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I just want to say thanks to you and Jef and Julia and to everybody who joined us today. You know, there are three kinds of people in the political world. There are people who wonder what happened after it's already happened. There are people who watch things happen. And then there are people who make things happen. And we're excited that Texas Realtors is at the table making things happen. And we would love for you to join us. So make sure you subscribe to Legislative Liaison. Make sure and email the field rep in your area to get involved on a contact team and help us work together to make things happen in Texas.
Cool. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll hope to see you soon.